It's dawn over Quảng Trị province, 1969. The jungle breathes in a low, wet mist. Every leaf drips with the weight of last night's rain. Somewhere beyond the tree line, a faint metallic click. A lone Marine lies prone in the mud, half submerged, the M14 pressed against his cheek. His breath fogs against the scope. Mosquitoes hover near the glint of his sweat. In the valley below, North Vietnamese spotters move like shadows between shattered bamboo. He doesn't flinch. The rifle barrel trembles, barely. He reaches down, tightens a small loop of twisted wire wrapped under the handguard. No thicker than a shoelace, no more valuable than 75 cents. The next breath is steady. The trigger pulls back, clean. A single shot cracks through the silence, echoing down the valley. 2 seconds later, one figure falls. No one will remember the name of the man behind that shot. But the wire would quietly save 2,000 Marines before the war was over. By 1968, the Vietnam War had reached a brutal equilibrium. Every inch of jungle had been fought over, lost, and taken again. The U.S. Marine Corps, battle-hardened from Hue to Khe Sanh, found itself locked in a new kind of war, a sniper's war. The enemy wasn't always visible. The North Vietnamese army had learned that one hidden marksman could stall an entire company. They called it one bullet, one soul, and they had the weapon to make it possible. The Soviet-made SVD Dragunov Slim, semi-automatic, reliable even in the humidity, the Dragunov could hit man-sized targets past 800 meters. Its PSO-1 scope, with range-finding reticle and infrared filter, gave the NVA sharpshooters a lethal edge in the misty mornings of the Central Highlands. Across the lines, American riflemen were armed with the M14, a weapon born from the famous M1 Garand but stretched for automatic fire and range. On paper, it was the superior rifle, heavier caliber, longer reach. In the mud of Vietnam, paper didn't matter. The M14's accuracy fell apart under heat. Its wooden stock swelled with moisture, pressing against the barrel and throwing shots wide. Every time a Marine cleaned it, humidity crept back in. A gun that shot true on the range at Camp Pendleton might miss by a foot in the jungle. By 1968, enemy snipers with SVDs were killing Marines from distances where return fire simply couldn't reach. Patrols began to fear open ground. Medevac pilots refused to hover. The psychological weight of the unseen rifleman was as heavy as the monsoon air itself. The Corps knew it needed an answer. They revived a dormant idea from World War II, the scout sniper. Trained marksmen who could hunt, not just react. The first classes at Camp Pendleton and later at Phu Bai mixed veterans from Korea with eager volunteers from infantry companies. They studied wind, range, patience, and above all adaptation. But there was still the rifle problem. No matter how skilled the shooter, a weapon that shifted zero every few rounds couldn't dominate a duel. The Marine Corps requested new rifles, M40s built from Remington 700 actions, but deliveries were slow. Many snipers were forced to keep using the M14, modifying it themselves in field workshops carved out of sandbags and rusted sheet metal. That's where creativity became survival. Marines began floating barrels, tightening bedding, even carving wedges from sea rations boxes to stabilize their weapons. Each trick passed along the line like whispered folklore. Among these frontline innovators were men whose names never reached any official report. Black Marines, often assigned the dirtiest jobs, worked night shifts guarding perimeters or hauling ammunition. They learned to make do with less, fixing jammed bolts, filing sears smooth, cutting strips of rubber from Jeep tires to dampen recoil. In a Corps still struggling with its own racial divides, recognition came slow. But skill spoke louder than rank. Somewhere along the defensive perimeter near Quảng Trị, a young black sniper noticed a pattern. After every long string of fire, the M14's point of impact drifted low and right. The barrel, heated and pressed by the wooden stock, bent just enough to ruin the shot. He needed a way to pull the stock clear, something simple, something field-ready. That night, using wire from a discarded radio antenna, he looped it under the handguard and twisted until the barrel floated free. The fix cost less than a cup of coffee at Da Nang Air Base and transformed the rifle's behavior. The next morning, his shots grouped tight again. The rifle sang straight through the fog. Word spread quietly through his platoon, then outward. The wire trick. It wasn't official doctrine. No manual mentioned it. But when supply couldn't keep up, ingenuity filled the gap. and in the shadowed jungles of northern Vietnam, where distance often decided who lived to see another dawn, that improvised wire began to tip the balance. Because for the Marines, survival was no longer about who fired first. It was about who could still hit when the rifles started to steam. The United States Marine Corps entered Vietnam with pride built on decades of discipline and tradition. But tradition can be a double-edged sword. By 1969, the Corps was fighting two wars, one in the jungle and one within itself. Inside the barracks, America's social fractures bled into military life. Civil rights headlines from home echoed through the ranks. Integration was law, but equality was still a struggle. Black Marines served on the same lines, bled on the same ground, yet rarely saw their stories recorded. Their courage often vanished into the paperwork of unit effectiveness. Still, they carried a quiet determination to prove through skill what the system refused to see. And in the sniper's world, skill was everything. No politics, no speeches, only the truth of the shot. At Camp Pendleton and later in country at Phu Bai, the Scout Sniper program demanded perfection. Recruits learned to read mirage through a scope, to gauge wind by the flick of elephant grass, to move slower than breathing. They studied anatomy charts and ballistics tables side by side, because understanding the human target meant understanding how to end a firefight before it began. The M14 remained their workhorse. Many rifles came straight from infantry issue, scratched, warped, often unreliable. Marine armorers tried every solution: fiberglass stocks, new bedding compounds, even hand-lapped barrels. But in the field, logistics lagged behind need. A sniper could wait months for a new stock while facing NVA marksmen equipped with factory-fresh SVDs smuggled through Laos. The gap between theory and survival widened, so the field adapted. Marines became mechanics, carpenters, and scientists all at once, learning that the difference between a marksman and a dead man might be a millimeter of wood or an ounce of tension. The black sniper with the wire had no laboratory, no recognition, only mud, sweat, and instinct. He understood that the M14's long barrel acted like a tuning fork. Each shot set off vibrations, barrel harmonics that shifted point of impact. If you could isolate the barrel from the stock, you could let it sing the same note every time. The wire loop did exactly that. It lifted pressure off the barrel and locked consistency in place. A backyard fix for a battlefield problem. No blueprints, no funding, just a moment of insight born of frustration. When his section leader noticed the tighter grouping, he didn't ask how, he just copied it. Soon dozens of rifles carried that same twist of wire under their handguards. In a war of ambush and attrition, the difference was immediate. Shots that once wandered now struck true across ravines and rice paddies. Enemy snipers who once felt untouchable at 700 meters began falling silent. Reports trickled upward, unofficial, anecdotal, but impossible to ignore. Armorers scribbled notes. Field mod improved 0 retention. Still, no one wrote his name. The Corps loved results but distrusted improvisation. To admit a homemade wire fix worked better than factory design was to admit the system had failed. So the innovation stayed underground, passed by rumor, preserved by habit. For the Marines at the front, that didn't matter. They cared only about the next mission, the next ridge, the next dawn. If a piece of wire kept their rifles true, it earned its place beside ammunition and canteens. And as those modified M14s began to outshoot the SVDs, something else shifted quietly. Confidence. Snipers once forced to duck and hide began hunting again. The battlefield equation flipped. This was more than marksmanship. It was empowerment through ingenuity. Every Marine who wrapped that wire felt ownership of his weapon and his fate. Every confirmed hit was a testament not only to training, but to the human mind under pressure. Because on the long slopes of Vietnam's Central Highlands, technology didn't decide survival, improvisation did. And in that unseen exchange of innovation, between a nameless Marine's wire and an enemy's precision rifle, the war of ideas began to tilt. The question now was simple. Could such small ingenuity stand against the relentless evolution of war? The answer would come soon. Under fire, he wasn't famous. He wasn't even officially recorded. But among his platoon, everyone knew him. They called him Mac, short for McPherson, though some said that wasn't his real name. He came from Baltimore, joined the Marines in '66, and by 21 he'd already buried more friends than birthdays he'd had. He didn't talk much. He just fixed things. Rifles, radios, morale. In a war that chewed up names and left only numbers, men like him were invisible to history. Yet their fingerprints lived on every weapon that worked a little better, every patrol that made it back. The Black Marines of Vietnam carried 2 fights on their shoulders, one against the enemy, and one against the prejudice that followed them even into combat zones. The Corps taught equality on paper, but barracks told another story. Promotions came slower, assignments harder, but the jungle didn't care about color. Only aim, patience, and courage. Mac learned that the hard way. When his squad leader went down at De Krong, he picked up the M14 and held the ridge for 20 minutes alone. That day he learned that a rifle wasn't just metal, it was memory, it was trust. And if that rifle failed, you failed your brothers. That belief drove his obsession. Every night after patrol, while others slept, he stripped the rifle apart, feeling for flaws, listening for imperfections like a musician tuning a broken instrument. When he found that the stock pressure warped the barrel, the answer came not from manuals but instinct, a loop of wire and a steady hand. That's how history moves sometimes, not with orders, but with intuition. Sniper warfare in Vietnam was unlike any before it. This was not open desert nor ruined city. It was chaos, heat, fog, insects, and echoes that bent sound and vision. Every shot risked giving away position. Every miss invited death. The North Vietnamese had perfected concealment. They moved in pairs, shooter and spotter, using bamboo blinds and spider holes. Their SVD rifles fired the 7.62 Kes 54mm round, powerful, flat-shooting, reliable. The PSO-1 scope's rangefinder and mil-dot pattern let them calculate distance even through haze. The U.S. Marines answered with training, patience, and the M14's heavier 7.62 51mm NATO round. But at 600 meters and beyond, the Dragunov's stability gave it an edge. A Marine sniper had to compensate with skill, reading wind off treetops, counting seconds between thunder and echo to estimate range. Every detail mattered. A shift in humidity could push a bullet off target by a full hand's width. Then came the wire modification. By floating the barrel and tightening vibration harmonics, it turned the M14 into a true precision weapon again. Accuracy at 700 meters improved dramatically, recorded by field notes later analyzed at Quantico. Tactically, this changed the tempo of engagements. Marines no longer had to close distance to counter an SVD. They could strike from equal range, controlling the high ground. The psychological reversal was profound. Enemy units that once pinned down patrols found themselves losing spotters first. In jungle warfare, morale was a weapon too. When Marines believed their rifles could outshoot the enemy, their posture changed. Shoulders squared, breath steadied, fear dimmed. A single shot that hit its mark could secure a perimeter for hours. A single miss could cost a platoon. The wire meant fewer misses, and in the calculus of Vietnam's endless patrols, fewer misses meant more lives. On a technical level, the M14 was both masterpiece and problem child. It combined grand reliability with modern firepower, but its wooden stock was a relic of the past. Humidity swelled it. Heat warped it. Every variable shifted its precision. The SVD Dragunov, meanwhile, had been engineered for the opposite: simplicity, synthetic materials, predictable flex. Its lightweight frame and semi-auto action gave Soviet-trained marksmen consistency, shot after shot. American engineers knew the M14's limits, but wartime bureaucracy moved slower than combat. Requests for synthetic stocks, improved glass bedding, and barrel floating systems took months. The wire trick bypassed all of it. It was crude physics, a tension counteracting expansion, a cheap stabilizer against the jungle's chaos. The wire lifted the barrel just enough to float it freely inside the stock, preventing wood pressure from shifting the point of aim. It wasn't new science. Target shooters had long known about barrel harmonics. But this was the first time it had been applied so effectively in combat. What cost defense contractors millions in testing, a single Marine solved with pocket scrap. When ordnance teams later inspected captured rifles and field mods, they were astonished. Reports described consistent accuracy retention and unusual bedding technique. They never learned it came from one man's ingenuity. But in a war where innovation often died under paperwork, the field had beaten the lab. In the long silence between each shot, between invention and recognition, the Marines learned a truth older than the rifles themselves. Technology only matters when someone understands it enough to change it. And soon, that understanding would face its hardest test, when the enemy struck back with precision of their own. Command didn't always like improvisation. In the Marine Corps, the chain of command was sacred, and deviation from issued gear often drew sharp words. But Vietnam tested every rule. By 1969, captains and lieutenants were learning what their men already knew. Nothing standard stays standard for long in the jungle. Field modifications weren't acts of rebellion. They were acts of survival. Yet, when reports of wire-modified M14s reached battalion level, reaction was mixed. Some officers dismissed it as unauthorized tinkering. Others quietly encouraged it. At the sniper schools in Da Nang and Phu Bai, instructors began hearing whispers from returning Marines. Rifles holding zero despite monsoon humidity. Barrel drift reduced. Groups tightening to half MOA at 600 yards. No one could deny the results. Still, it was an uncomfortable truth that the Corps' finest accuracy had come not from Quantico's workshops, but from a muddy trench near Quảng Trị. Leadership eventually adapted, ordering experimental bedding procedures for the M14s still in service. But the official memos never mentioned wire. Among the field ranks, respect traveled differently. Word spread of that black sniper who fixed his rifle with scrap. His name wasn't written in the dispatches, but every platoon knew the story. It became legend, a small defiance wrapped in professionalism, proof that ingenuity could outrank hierarchy when bullets started flying. In time, some officers embraced that spirit. They began rewarding initiative instead of punishing it. They realized that leadership in Vietnam wasn't about enforcing manuals, no, it was about trusting the men who had to live inside the fight. That quiet cultural shift, born from a piece of wire, reshaped how Marines thought about adaptation in combat. Innovation became not a privilege but a responsibility. There's something poetic about the simplicity of it. A few inches of wire twisting between steel and sweat, bridging the gap between theory and instinct. It embodied a truth that every soldier eventually learns. Wars are not won by weapons. They're won by minds. Mac didn't know he was redefining ballistics. He just wanted to keep his friends alive. But moral weight hides inside every invention born of necessity. Each improvement means someone once suffered without it. In this case, that wire carried both genius and pain. The frustration of a Marine whose equipment failed him, the quiet dignity of fixing it himself, and the awareness that no one above him would ever give credit. In a war where politics blurred purpose, where young men died for inches of mud, small victories became sacred. A rifle that held zero wasn't just a mechanical triumph. It was a form of faith. Faith that skill still mattered. Faith that the system hadn't forgotten the individual. That's what kept the snipers steady. They didn't fight for ideology. They fought for each other. Every shot was a promise that someone on that ridge or in that convoy would make it home. And if all it took to fulfill that promise was a twist of wire, then morality found its meaning not in grand speeches, but in the quiet courage to innovate. To the North Vietnamese army, the Dragunov sniper was a symbol of modern Soviet precision. They trained carefully, often with Soviet advisors, teaching recruits how to stalk, range, and exfiltrate unseen. Their doctrine valued patience above glory, one bullet, one soldier. For months, these sharpshooters ruled the high ground. Their long-range fire dominated river crossings and jungle trails. Then suddenly, something changed. Reports from NVA field units began noting unusual effectiveness from Marine counter-snipers. Their rifles hit faster, truer. Engagement distances extended beyond the old safe zones. Soviet advisors assumed the Americans had issued new rifles. They hadn't. The advantage came from a field modification no intelligence officer could have predicted. Captured NVA documents later confirmed a shift in tactics. Snipers were ordered to relocate positions more frequently and avoid dueling beyond 600 meters. The U.S. Marine sniper's reach had grown, and so had his reputation. In the eyes of the enemy, the Americans had regained dominance in a domain that once belonged to them. But behind that dominance was no new doctrine, no new funding, Just a single man's resolve and a wire twisted under his rifle's stock. Even the enemy respected that kind of ingenuity. Because in every war, innovation is universal language, the code spoken between survivors. And so, as both sides adapted and counter-adapted, the stage was set for confrontation, the moment when theory and fieldcraft would collide under the crushing pressure of battle. The sniper's duel that followed would prove just how far one idea could reach when lives hung in the balance. It was the dry season of 1970, near the Laotian border, Operation Dewey Canyon. The 9th Marine Regiment had pushed deep into enemy territory, carving narrow fire bases out of steep jungle ridges. Supplies came by helicopter. Everything else was carried on shoulders and faith. Sniper teams worked ahead of the infantry, ghosts in the hills. Mac was one of them. He and his spotter, a quiet kid from Nebraska named Harlow, had been tasked with overwatch for an advancing company near Hill 512. Intel warned of North Vietnamese regulars and something worse, a veteran sniper team with confirmed kills on Marines the week before. By dawn, fog draped the valley like breath on glass. Mac and Harlow lay flat on a slope of red clay, half concealed by elephant grass, rifles trained across a kilometer of open terrain. They waited. They listened. Through the M14's unreliable, Mac watched a ridgeline shadow shift, a flash of sunlight off glass. Scope glint. Enemy. He froze. The rangefinder dial spun under his thumb. 800 meters, far beyond where the M14 had once been trusted. The SVD fired first. A supersonic hiss, a thud of dirt inches from Harlow's arm. The Dragunov's counterfire came again. I'm fast, precise, confident. Mac exhaled slow, his heart steady, eyes steady. He didn't blink. He didn't flinch. He adjusted elevation, feeling the faint vibration of the barrel and the tension of the wire loop beneath it. Holding the rifle's song in tune, he whispered, "Wind left, half value." Harlow nodded, spotting through binoculars. Another shot cracked from the ridge. This one closer. Mac centered the reticle, compensating for wind and distance. He squeezed. The M14 barked, deeper, heavier than the Dragunov's lighter tone. A pause. Then a faint, distant figure folded sideways, motionless. Silence swallowed the ridge. For minutes, nothing moved. Then movement again, the NVA spotter dragging his partner down a trench. Mac fired again. Missed by inches, adjusted, fired once more. The second man fell. Harlow whispered, "Got both." Mac stayed still. The smell of cordite mixed with damp leaves. His cheek pressed against the rifle, the wire warm from barrel heat. That wire had held the barrel true through the full fight. No drift, no wobble, no loss of zero. The first Marine sniper victory at over 800 meters in that sector. Recorded, logged, verified. A shot most M14s could never hold, achieved by a modification worth less than $1. Within hours, word spread through the valley. The patrol advanced safely. Not a single Marine hit crossing that open ground. Command logged it as enemy sniper team neutralized. The details, the wire, the innovation, the man, were never written. But among the snipers, it became gospel. "Float your barrel like Mac did," they said. "That's how you win a duel." Later that evening, the monsoon rolled in. Rain hammered the valley, turning clay into blood-red streams. Mac sat beneath his poncho, cleaning the M14 by lantern light. Harlow watched silently. "You ever gonna tell Ordnance what you did?" the spotter asked. Mac smiled faintly, twisting the wire tighter. "Nah," he said. "Let him figure it out." That was his way. Quiet victory, no need for medals. But the rifles told the story for him. By week's end, 5 more sniper teams in the regiment had replicated the fix. Soon, nearly every M14 sniper rifle in I Corps carried that same glint of coiled metal beneath the handguard. And with it came a change in tone across the front. Reports from enemy units noted increased American counter-sniper effectiveness. For the first time since the SVD entered the war, NVA marksmen were being outranged. The Corps didn't yet realize it, but a revolution in battlefield precision had begun, not from the drawing boards of Springfield Armory, but from a muddy ridge and a piece of wire. As the weeks passed, sniper duels became a deadly chess match. Each side learned, adapted, countered, but something in the balance had shifted on confidence. American patrols moved with steadier pace. The fear of unseen rifles began to fade. In the letters home, some Marines wrote simply, "New trick. M14 shoots true now." They didn't know the name behind it, but somewhere deep in the jungle that Black Marine knew his fix had worked. He had changed the battlefield, quietly, completely, and the war, as it often did, was about to test that innovation once more, on a day when everything could go wrong. The jungle was louder that morning. Helicopters droned above the mist, echoing between the ridgelines. It was March 1970, Operation Texas Star. Mac and Harlow had been reassigned to support a reconnaissance platoon pushing into the Ashau Valley, a place where the air itself seemed to hum with danger. The Ashau was a funnel of death, steep terrain, low clouds, and trails crawling with NVA supply columns. Every ridge had eyes. Every shadow could shoot back. By midday, the recon platoon had reached an abandoned NVA bunker complex. Empty ration tins, charred sandals, a few spent cartridges scattered in the dirt. Mac scanned the valley below, too quiet. He knew that kind of quiet. It meant something was waiting. Then the jungle erupted. Mortars first. 3 impacts in tight succession. Tree branches shattered overhead, showering them with splinters and clay. Automatic fire tore through the underbrush, tracers slicing orange streaks through the fog. Contact front. The Marines dove for cover. Mac and Harlow slid behind a half-buried log, mud spraying as rounds snapped overhead. He flicked open the lens cap of the scope, already scanning. Across the clearing, shapes moved between the tree trunks, disciplined, coordinated. NVA regulars closing in with support fire from the flanks. Pinned in the center, the recon team had nowhere to go. Mac keyed his radio low and calm. Viper 2-1, this is Raven. Contact, heavy small arms, estimate platoon strength, requesting immediate fire mission. Static. Then, negative Raven, artillery tied up. You're on your own. Extract ETA 15 mics, 15 minutes. 15 minutes was a lifetime in an ambush. Mac set the M14 on its bipod, tightening the wire under the barrel. He looked to Harlow. Spot me targets. We thin them before they flank us. Harlow nodded, calling bearings and distance as he peered through binoculars. Left tree line, 200 meters. 3 moving fast. Mac steadied his breath, squeezed. 1 down. Adjusted, fired again. Another figure dropped. The M14 barked steady rhythm, each shot precise, deliberate. But for every man he hit, 2 more appeared. Rounds chewed through leaves inches from his face. A bullet tore through Harlow's sleeve. He cursed but kept spotting. Then, the worst sound a sniper can hear, a metallic ping. His scope mount loosened, jarred by recoil. Without the wire, that would have been the end. Mac reached forward, twisting the wire tighter, feeling it bite into his glove. The rifle steadied, held true. He resumed firing. Harlow called out, "They're flanking right, near the log bridge." Mac pivoted, eyes cutting through the fog. He saw the lead NVA squad moving low, trying to outmaneuver the Marines pinned near the bunker. He took 1 deep breath, 3 rapid shots. 1, 2, 3, each one finding its mark. The flank stalled. Momentum shifted. The recon team, emboldened, counterfired. Grenades burst from M60s, the chaotic chorus of survival. Then came the sound they'd been praying for. Distant rotors. Extraction birds inbound, but the landing zone was still under fire. Mac knew they'd never make it unless the ridge guns were silenced. "Cover me," he told Harlow, slinging the rifle and crawling upslope toward a shattered termite mound. He lay flat, mud streaked across his face, aligning the scope with the tree line above the LZ. There, muzzle flash, enemy machine gun. He adjusted elevation, exhaled, fired. The gun went silent. Seconds later, another burst and higher up. He rolled, braced, fired again. The valley echoed with his rifle's rhythm. 1 man anchoring an entire withdrawal. Each shot carried the precision of countless hours of practice and the trust of that handmade wire. As the first UH-1 Huey dipped into the clearing, Mac and Harlow covered the rear guard, dropping the last of the NVA riflemen who tried to charge through the fog. By the time the final chopper lifted off, the jungle was burning. The ambush had failed. Every Marine was alive. Later, at Firebase Ripcord, Mac sat outside the tent, helmet on his knee. A maintenance sergeant walked by, eyeing the twisted bit of wire under his rifle. "What the hell's that?" Mac smiled faintly. "Insurance." The sergeant knelt, studying it. "You know, That's not in the manual. Neither is getting shot, Mac said. Word spread. Again. Within a month, unit armorers across I Corps were quietly replicating the modification. It earned a name, the MacWire. Unofficial, unrecorded, but respected. Reports began filtering back from other sectors, higher hit ratios, fewer malfunctions, tighter groupings. The Marine Sniper program, struggling under pressure, suddenly found new life, all from that one field-made solution. Years later, when the M40 replaced the M14, some of the old-timers still wrapped wire around their barrels. Not because they had to, but because it reminded them of a man who refused to let his weapon fail him. The war would take many things. But that idea, that belief in craftsmanship and adaptation endured. It became part of Marine sniper culture itself. When historians look back at Vietnam, they rarely find Mac's name in the reports. He never made the newspapers. But his wire lived on, in every rifle that stayed zeroed through the heat, mud, and chaos. A symbol of how the smallest innovation, born in desperation, can tilt the balance of war, and somewhere, if you listen close, maybe you can still hear it, the hum of tensioned wire beneath steel, holding true against the impossible. The Vietnam War was not won by rifles. It was survived by them. For the Marines of I Corps, the fight wasn't just against an enemy they couldn't see. It was against the land itself, the heat-warped barrels, the humidity-rusted steel, and jungle mud turned precision engineering into unreliable weight. But word of the MacWire spread faster than any formal directive. No paperwork, no orders, just stories passed from one squad to another, about a Marine who'd found a way to keep his M14 shooting straight when everything else bent or broke. By 1971, armorers in Da Nang and Phu Bai were quietly adding makeshift tensioning wire during maintenance rotations. Some used piano wire. Others stripped communications cable. It wasn't uniform, but it worked. In a war where trust in equipment meant survival, the simplest trick became gospel. The official reports never mentioned it. No memo ever carried the words barrel tension modification or M14 wire reinforcement. The bureaucratic language of the Pentagon didn't have space for field improvisation, but the snipers did. And they knew exactly what it meant. A tight grouping meant less time exposed. Less time exposed meant fewer dead Marines. By late 1971, Marine rifle units operating around Khe Sanh and Camp Carroll recorded noticeable improvements in hit probability at ranges beyond 600 meters, even without access to the newer M40 systems. Unofficially, the reason was known. Field-modified M14s instructors at the 1st Marine Division Scout Sniper School began mentioning barrel harmonics, more often in training debriefs. It wasn't about the wire anymore, but it was about the principle behind it. Control the vibration. Control the shot. The M14 was eventually phased out for the M16 and later precision rifles. But for those who served in the thick of Vietnam, the M14 was more than a weapon. It was a partner. It kicked hard, weighed heavy, and punished poor aim. Yet in the right hands with the right balance, it could dominate the field. When the first M40A1s arrived in the early 1970s, many snipers still wrapped wire or paracord beneath the stock, claiming it steadied their zero. No manual said so, but every veteran who'd walked out of the jungle alive swore by it. Some things aren't written in doctrine, they're written in blood and mud. After the war, men like Harlow returned home to a country that didn't ask questions about what they'd seen. The jungles were gone. The rifles were gone. But habits remained. At civilian shooting ranges, you could sometimes spot an old Marine tightening a bit of wire under his stock before sighting in. A quiet ritual, a tribute to a forgotten field fix that once kept him breathing. No one needed to ask where it came from. Among armorers, the story lingered. A whispered legend of a black Marine sniper whose 75-cent idea saved thousands. No rank, no award, just respect. And in a strange way, that respect outlasted everything else. It wasn't about who invented it or where it started. It was about the Marine Corps' oldest truth. Adapt, overcome, survive. When the war ended in 1975, official evaluations of small arms performance showed mixed results. The M14's accuracy was praised. Its maintenance demands were criticized. The weapons story closed quietly in the ledgers of military bureaucracy. But in the field, In the minds of those who carried it, the M14 wasn't a line in a report. It was a memory of sweat, wire, and precision under fire. And even decades later at sniper reunions, old Marines would talk about it. The wire trick. That's what kept our rifles zeroed. The black Marine out of Quảng Trị, he figured it out. No one remembered his full name. But every man who told the story did so with the same tone, quiet reverence. The legend of the Mac wire would fade from official archives, but never from memory. It was proof that innovation in war doesn't always come from factories or generals. Sometimes it comes from necessity, from a man too stubborn to miss a shot. And that idea, that a field modification could save lives, would go on to shape the mindset of future Marines. SEALs and Special Forces shooters for decades to come, the war had changed the tools of combat forever. But it was small human ingenuity, a simple twist of wire, that had reminded everyone what mattered most. It wasn't about perfection, it was about survival. And from the humid valleys of Vietnam to the training grounds of Quantico, that survival mindset carried forward, quietly, but unbroken. When the guns finally fell silent for most of America, the technical story kept moving. Combat experience from Vietnam fed into a slow, stubborn redesign of sniper tools and doctrine. The M14 would not remain the Corps' long-range platform forever. Newer, purpose-built sniper rifles and bedding systems would replace it. But the lesson of the wire, the principle of controlling barrel, harmonics in isolating the barrel from inconsistent stocks found its way into those improvements like a seed beneath the soil. Ordnance. Designers and small arms engineers had always known, in theory, that a floating barrel and consistent bedding improve accuracy. What Mac's improvised loop proved in practice was that the difference between theory and survival could be measured in inches of groupings and lives spared. In the years after Vietnam, military armorers increasingly favored synthetic stocks, glass bedding, and carefully engineered free-floating barrels, measures that reduced the very pressure wood and heat had exerted on the M14. Those changes made rifles less temperamentally tied to humidity and climate, so an army could count on performance in a jungle as easily as on a shooting range. But institutional change is rarely linear. Procurement cycles are slow. Budgets and politics bend decisions. So the human field-level fix remained important even as the formal solutions arrived. Veterans who transitioned into civilian life carried the practical knowledge with them. At civilian ranges and in informal training circles, former Marine snipers would demonstrate bedding, torque values on scope mounts, and the way a barrel sings when it's free to vibrate consistently. The how of shooting, position, breathing, wind calling, was taught alongside the why, and that tangible tradecraft kept the memory of the wire alive. Culturally, the story of the wire exposed something else. How much of wartime innovation is anonymous? Official histories, foreshortened in reports and supply manifests, rarely capture the small acts that made survival possible. The Black Marine whose hands first looped that wire did not enter the pages of formal citations for that single adaptation. But his contribution lived in the minutes and miles afterward. Countless patrols crossing more safely, medevacs avoided, squads that returned whole over time, veterans reunions, oral history projects, and independent documentary efforts gathered those fragmentary accounts. Sniper associations and Marine history groups ensured that tactics and fieldcraft were not lost to time. These communities preserved the lore, the specific ways armorers improvised bedding solutions in the field, the particular gauges of wire that seemed to work best, and the stories of men who would rather wear silence than take credit. Museums and private collections sometimes exhibit M14s showing field modifications, and curators use them to tell the human side of weapons evolution, how a cheap, improvised fix can ripple outward to influence doctrine. Technically, the prime legacy is straightforward. Modern sniper rifles and marksmanship curricula emphasize consistent bedding, controlled harmonics, and attention to torque on mounts, lessons that echo the same physical reality Mac exploited. Later precision platforms incorporated features intended to make field improvisation unnecessary: stable stocks, modular bedding systems, and improved quality control in manufacturing. In that sense, the wire's logic became codified. Give the barrel a consistent environment, and the rifle becomes a predictable tool rather than a temperamental hazard. Yet the social legacy is more complicated. Recognition for contributions from Black Marines and other minority service members has been uneven throughout U.S. military history. While some stories gained traction in oral histories and among comrades, official recognition, medals, mentions, and command histories, or institutional commemoration, often lagged. That absence matters. It shapes which stories enter the public record and which remain whispered testimony in mess halls and reunions. The Mac Wire survived precisely because men told it to one another. It survived because the lives it saved testified to its worth. In training halls decades later, instructors still tell simple, stubborn stories. How a small, clever adaptation once allowed Marines to outrange a weapon the enemy believed invincible. Those stories serve as ethics as much as tradecraft, lessons in resourcefulness, humility, and the responsibility shared by combat units to solve problems with what they have. The final, practical imprint of the story is the mindset it propagated. Today's military culture values adaptation, rapid field modifications vetted by ordnance and then institutionalized when valid. That cycle of learn, improvise, evaluate, adopt is partly the cultural descendant of countless little fixes. Like the Mac Wire, it is the acceptance that soldiers and sailors at the point of the spear will often see the problem first and sometimes hold the solution in their pockets. So when historians catalog the evolution of sniper systems from Vietnam's jury-rigged patches to modern, factory-spec precision platforms, they do so knowing that history is made at two speeds: the slow clock of procurement decisions and the blistering immediate tempo of survival under fire. The wire lives between those speeds, a small physical object that connected practice to policy, survival to design, anonymity to legacy. And as those design lessons matured into doctrine, the human story remained. A quiet reminder that a single improvisation, born of frustration, ingenuity, and the desire to keep comrades alive could echo for decades across training tables and firing ranges. War often remembers the loudest machines and the most visible men, but the true legacy of conflict is quieter, found in the small improvised acts that keep others alive. A twist of wire, a fraction of pressure relieved, a rifle that held its zero when it mattered most. Those things rarely make it into textbooks. They exist in the shared memory of those who carried the weight, the men who learned that ingenuity was as vital as courage. The Mac Wire was never patented, never standardized, never recognized. Yet its spirit lives in every soldier who refuses to let circumstance dictate outcome. It represents the soul of adaptation, that invisible bridge between problem and solution, forged not in laboratories but in the dirt and chaos of battle. When modern Marines disassemble their rifles, torque each screw, and inspect bedding fit, they follow a lineage built on lessons paid for in sweat and fear. Every detail checked, every ounce of precision verified. All echo the same truth Mac once proved in silence. That mastery isn't about perfect tools, but about perfect understanding. War may evolve, from rifles to drones, from jungle to desert, but the essence never changes. Somewhere someone will still improvise, still adapt, still find a way to make imperfect tools work in impossible conditions. And when they do, they'll carry forward the same quiet promise that a single act of human ingenuity, no matter how small, can alter the rhythm of history.